evening, New Zealand. Good, very early morning, east side. It's a glorious sunny day here in Sweden, and we are going to tackle the final video in this series on metapsychology. And Grumpy Angus from episode 5 has got a smile on his face today because bloody hell, there's some good stuff in this. What we're going to look at today. Really so much going on. So as a taster, I think we're going to get into Aurobindo a lot more today. He's super interesting, and perhaps another. I'm going to posit that actually Gregg is actually a closet anthroposophist. He doesn't know it yet, but we've discovered his secret. And we're going to, I at least are going to try and provide a little bit of evidence for that as we go through the video clips that we're going to look at. We've got quite a few to look at, so we'll get cracking. Just before I give an intro to the first video, Kate, Jeff, did you want to add anything there? That looks like a no.
No, I enjoyed reading your article about the similarities between Aurobindo and Steiner, so I'm sure that you'll have great things to.
Okay, it just gets it really is. That is so. I skimmed the surface there, really skimmed the surface. Anyway, right, the first video clip we're going to look at is actually Gregg, and he's been talking previously about the Cambrian explosion, this period like 400-500 million years ago, when life on Earth suddenly burst into being. It's one of these periods in prehistory that is really confounds so many of the models about how about what life is. I know there's a guy called Michael Behe who did a wonderful book on the problems with irreducible complexity around, and he focused a lot on this period. There's another guy whose name I've forgotten who wrote a book called Darwin's Doubt. Stephen Meyer, I think his name might be. I'll write it up in the show notes, but has done some excellent work in this area, showing how what's going on in this Cambrian explosion when life burst onto the planet is just an amazing field of study that throws up so many interesting questions. Those two people are both more into the intelligent design side of the community, which makes them interesting people to listen to. Anyway, so we're going to listen to Gregg talking about that for a couple of minutes, and then we'll have a little talk about what we thought about what was going on there. Oh, I need to get the video up first, don't I? There we go. Okay, off we go.
Than the basic psychology, okay, and it's as different as neuroscience now is seen as a different. It's sort of branch of biology, but neuroscience is a hybrid. It sits in a hybrid between psychology and the biological sciences. Human psychology should sit as a hybrid between base psychology and the social sciences. Okay. And what should happen is human cognitive science, what John is an expert in, should then be merged, effectively connected with human personality. And then that should be connected effectively with social psychology and developmental psychology, human developmental psychology. And that should perform a coherent base on which then provides a potential ground for a totally different class of sciences, the social sciences. Okay. And so what this gives you is a natural into human, and then human is organized at that particular level. And then you get the social sciences, which actually the human and social sciences, because of the double hermeneutic, create a whole nother set of complexifications, which we were talking about because the description is of the human and the nature of other types of things like artificial technology and other kinds of issues that emerge as a behavior pattern create then a need to break the philosophy of social science as separate from the philosophy of natural science. Okay. So to me, what's all that? And then I'll say a few other things, then I'll stop. That's the descriptive explanatory bridge of natural into social, which places psychology in this hub place where basic connects down into biology, and then human connects up, and then that connects into social sciences. The justification line is unbelievably crucial, both for the ontological description of what we do. My dog Benji has not been following this conversation well.
Okay. Basic connects down, psychology connects up. If we didn't listen to the whole of his description, which is why I preempted the bit about Cambrian explosion. But one of the really fascinating things that Gregg is getting into is this clear recognition that how can we put it in terms that when we never see life, we only ever see the effects of life living through matter, a little bit like we never see electricity, we only ever see the effects of electricity. So that's like the basic, the mineral kingdom is like, he's saying it is quite obvious here that we have a life which is not based on matter. Matter is the clothes by which life expresses itself. And then you've got in the interior realm, the realm of psychology, which itself is also beyond life. It uses the processes of life as like so that it can manifest itself, which in turn are based on matter. But ultimately, that we are yet again talking about a separate realm that is not one. The psychological realm is not dependent on the life realm. It works through it to provide evidence of itself, but it is not it. And then when we talk about the the cognitive realm, yet again, we're moving from something that is merely beyond, so like an inner life of sensation. We are moving to a life where that inner life is capable of self-reflection and self-observation. And we'll see a little bit later how this, because Gregg will talk about it, but our window. Anybody versed in anthroposophy recognizes immediately the structure that Gregg is referring to, which is a physical body, etheric body, astral body, and the I. And it's so wonderful to hear him talking about it with his own language. He's using the evidence of the real world. He's using the evidence of sciences to demonstrate that these aren't just fictional realities. They aren't made up. They aren't made up concepts. They are, as these guys like to say, they are concepts based in reality. And I'd just like to add like one more point, and then I'd like to invite you two guys in to comment more. But this is really the essence of why anthroposophy is so useful, because Stein is giving us concepts to play with. We, though, then go and look in the real world, the world of the senses, for evidence of the etheric body of life forces. We go into the real world and we look for evidence of the inner, the sensation, the psychological forces. And then we also look for evidence of the I. And it's not about learning a doctrine. It's using concepts to help you understand the world better. And what's so rewarding here watching Gregg is his capacity to systematize, which John praises him for so much, is really coming to the fore here and demonstrating, yep, we've got a system. And you know what, guys? It's the same system as they have in anthroposophy. He doesn't say that. but it's also the same system which Aurobindo develops. Who wants to go next?
I'll go. I think I'll just talk about why I like the system that anthroposophy kind of has outlined for us. And the main reason I like it is because when you look out into the world and you have the levels, the 4 levels of the physical, the mineral world, which is the sort of perfected forms, and then the life world, the etheric world, which allows for process and development and dynamic change, which is different from material. And then that is exemplified in the plant, and the etheric world is the plant world. And then the astral world, the world where animals have nervous systems and drives, and survival is linked to their one life, and their sentience and their sympathies and antipathies get developed the higher the animal is developed. And then the human being, as you were saying, has that capacity for self-consciousness and self-reflection. But the great thing about the system is that it's not just the world, but it's also the human being, and that we all also have those 4 levels. And I think that you can hear in Gregg's system that he wants it to reflect the real world and also the experience of a human being and the experience of the psychological subject. And I just think, yes, I just love that. And there's just, and that system in anthroposophy is so rich because there's so many connections that you can make. You can realize that, the physical world only exists because the life world exists. The astral world, the life world only exists because the astral world exists. It's just not permeated through yet. And then that's why you understand that human consciousness exists for the service of the whole world. I'm not sure if I'm explaining that right, but you can, when you learn the system of anthroposophy and you see how each level informs the next, it's the most satisfying thing in the world, because it is something that you can trust yourself in, and you can judge to be true based on your own experience. So like you said, it's not a dogma. It's something that's both evidenced in our own experience and in the sensory experience. So good.
That was good. Wait a minute. Can you hear me?
Mm.
You can. Okay. That was really good systematizing of anthroposophy in juxtaposition to this system that Gregg is. I don't know. It seems in a way that he's discovering it.
Yeah.
This is what I think that you've mentioned, Kate, in appreciating his systemizing abilities, is that he uses it to sort of clarify for everyone, but for himself, and you can see him doing it. And perhaps this is the way. I don't know him well enough, but perhaps this is the way that he keeps advancing and breaking his limit, right? But I also want to mention the limits in the here, and then as an aside, before that, where Steiner in chapter 12 of Philosophy of Freedom says basically that the evolutionists would get to what Philosophy of Freedom starts with, essentially. And so I think the limits are exposed, which is important, in the directionality of this physicalist description, say that the nervous, it's the point at which the nervous system was established, that mindedness was established. And I'm not sure that's correct. And I think it's an important point as relates to the aim of knowledge, because if you accept that in anything other than a model or a metaphor, a working theory, if you just say that's the fact, then you have this consciousness becomes this epiphenomena, just meaninglessly through some natural selection process by accident, just plopped on top of the what Zach refers to as the stack, right? And the other thing about anthroposophy is it has an evolutionary picture, and the evolutionary picture has the nervous system being developed before it was actually physical on a previous an original evolutionary phase of the Earth's evolution itself. And so it places the human being at the very beginning of existence as part of the origin of existence. And so that re-originating is something that we've participated in to some degree of to growing self-awareness, say, that this is maybe an oversimplification of the way in which an anthroposophist would describe the directionality of evolution. But I think it's important also to notice that difference. And because the physicalist approach, even though he's sort of eschews the physicalist approach in his mind, he wants to get beyond it. He wants to leap into where Sri Aurobindo and Rudolf Steiner, frankly, are in relationship to the directionality of a narrative. But unless psychology itself has a spiritual element, it will not be able to inform biology about where it's wrong as it relates to cellular communication, for example, because he describes beautifully at the beginning of this big history narrative. He describes the level of the single cell and the cell's communication, and the directionality of the evolutionary biology has not allowed yet for that communication actually in its infrastructure, because the cell is a mechanical object, and it doesn't have a way to communicate in sort of non-locality, say. So I just wanted to, I agree with you. I think this is a great starting point. I think that it's helpful that he clarifies. It also helps to see where the limits are, and where if you're married to the linearity of the narrative, how you'll go off aim further and further and further when it comes to applying the sciences to medicine, to psychology, and then we have this a pandemic of iatrogenesis.
I'm actually going to shift forward a little bit further than I planned here. We might go back to the point that I'm hopping over here, because Greg, I think there's a point where he's like wonderfully honest, which talks to the point you're making there, Jeff. It's like, how far has he moved on, and how far is he actually still stuck in the materialist paradigm that you were talking about there? But I think it was really interesting in how he describes his own process of transformation, really, because this is what he ends up talking about in this next clip that we're about to watch. Okay. Oh, I forgot to start it here. Okay, let's have another look. Okay.
And people are like, hey,
right, there we go.
Emerged with my system. I was like, well, this is really anchored in science. And then people are like, hey, you should check out Wilbur. And I'm like, well, Wilbur, is he really anchored into an actual naturalistic ontology? And so I would use that to be kind of dismissive. And along those lines, I got a book in 2010. Actually, this book, I picked it up at just a Greater Psychology, the Psychology of Sri Aurobindo. And when I first read this book in 2010, where I was still in the process of writing my book, and I was growing a little bit in relationship to the inadequacies of the standard empirical program. And of course, I've always been arguing, I was in it still at that time, that we just need good meta-theoretical organization. This paradigm's relatively healthy. But over the last 10 years, there's really been a fundamental shift about the magnitude of the inaccuracy of the modernist paradigm and its capacity to appropriately evolve from the principles that it's actually grounded in. And that and that's reflected in my own continued alienation about the inability of the system, at least in my own, obviously it's egocentric. It's like, here's a fucking model that's actually 10 times better than the chaotic organization that you have. And every individual or conversation you have, everybody nods along with it. And yet you can't leverage the system at all to move in a coordinated fashion. And in part because the theoretical argument that I was making actually is like, your commitment to empiricism that you've actually institutionalized and the way you get all your grants is kind of, weak. I mean, it leads to a huge amount of fucking chaos and enormous amount of wasted energy.
Not a popular view, Greg.
That's not a popular view. People are like, okay, behind the scenes, actually, it's a popular view. People are actually, oh my God, I always feared that this was a useless enterprise. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people who say that, yet at an institutional level, there's no real capacity of the system basically like, oh my God, we have to actually stop first principles and what are you going to do? Retract all the damn textbooks? It's a nightmare. So, but anyway, so then I get more and more alienated from the structure, even though most of my parents are professors, I get embedded in the academy. It's like, God, what the hell is this? So the bottom line story and so then obviously I shift and go crazier and build gardens and things like that as just sort of different alternatives. And my own consciousness begins to shift significantly in relationship to the harmony essentially between an exterior empiricism and an interior empiricism capacity, but at the same time, more and more alienation. And as you know, John and others I kind of transformed, did some wisdom energy transformation stuff. So ultimately, then bring you to the punchline of this is that a month ago or so, I started reading this book again, A Greater Psychology. And so Sri Aurobindo is a great yogic philosopher. And although I knew it, I just heard it so differently as he starts to open up. And he offers in this book a critique of psychology. Hey, you guys do the exterior thing, but actually 2,500 years ago, we started attending to the interior. And my own language system on mind is a way of saying this is sort of like the way I define mind is like, hey, mind 1 is like animal behavior. Mind 3 is this justifying thing. And mind 2 is this epistemological portal that, has adverbial adjectival consciousness and is a witness function.
Boy, there's a lot there. That could be broken up into two different pieces. The critique of the modernist paradigm. He just did that almost in passing, but that's the crux of the problem. Is the critique of the modernist paradigm, and don't give me this bullshit. Not you, friends. I mean the world. Don't give me this bullshit. That science is a self-corrective, has self-corrective mechanisms within it, and we were wrong about virology, and we were wrong about the effectiveness of the jab, and we were wrong about, but science corrects itself because it has internal and that's the process of science is correction. No. Science is meant to do that, but it can't do it within a modernist paradigm. Because it rationalizes its own belief in a simulative existence rather than studying life in its context.
That's the segue to the bit that we've just skipped over. So I'll go back to that in a second. I think the reason I chose this video clip, you've highlighted an important point there, Jeff, but I really admire the honesty of this guy saying 10 years ago, I thought this is a pile of crap. There was nothing in there. But now conceptually something has shifted in him. And he uses the term, my consciousness began to shift. And this is what these guys, this is what their whole video series is about. So like this transformation process. And here in Gregg, we've got this wonderful example of how I wasn't open to something 10 years ago. Conceptually, it was like, no, empiricism is the way forward, and that's the way we've got to go. But eventually that empiricism runs into a brick wall. And he's actually sort of mature enough to say, okay, I recognize the problems. We've got a crisis in the model. And rather than just like saying, oh well, everybody else is doing it, so I'll just play the game. He says, no. I'm going to look at other models. And he turns to a book that he first read 10 years ago, and all of a sudden he says, bang. It's like all that reading that he's brought in there in the meantime gains a new context, and that is really is a joy to behold. Wonderful.
Yeah, it's a joy to behold, but my spidey senses started getting a bit frustrated when I was listening to that, and I think I've picked up in myself why. I think the problem is the word alternative, or the word shift, or the word these words have caused problems in me, because it seems like you can't have it. Well, let's say we have a modernist paradigm and it's given us something useful, and then it's reached the limit of its usefulness, and we want to be able to take what we can get out of modernism. I mean, these people do. People who have that kind of systematizing, analytical brain, which is the mechanistic way of thinking. It's a way of thinking that can understand the mineral world, the physical world of pieces and parts that can be broken apart. And it's a wonderful foundation and is necessary. And then when it comes to things that it cannot understand, I get annoyed about words like shift, because it's not, to me, it's not a shift to, oh, I have a bad paradigm and I need a different paradigm to understand this, and a different paradigm to understand this. In anthroposophy, all the ways of thinking are nested in one another. Like the way of thinking that can understand pieces of mechanistic science in the modern worldview is nested inside of etheric thinking, which understands process, which understands which is equipped to understand life process, because it's more imaginal. It's imaginative thinking, and that is nested inside of inspirative thinking, intuitive thinking, etc. I'm not going to go too far into it, but that's kind of, I love anthroposophy for that, and I reject some of Gregg's system because it just seems too arbitrary. It's like, when I'm in this zone, I use this kind of way of thinking until it doesn't work, and then I pick up another way of thinking from an Indian mystic, and then until that doesn't work, I pick up, do you know what I mean? That's what it feels like. It doesn't feel necessary and nested in itself the way anthroposophy does. It's, yes, mechanistic thinking has its importance and its uses, and it's very important that we understand how to use it, and Steiner talks about that. And Steiner also himself, I would say, probably mastered that way of thinking, even though it was difficult for him. He went to technical colleges and learned about engineering. And I think it's, you know what I mean? I like that it's nested inside of different ways of knowing, different epistemological methods, perhaps. Instead of, So, otherwise, it just feels arbitrary to me when I listen. As great as it is that he's like, yeah, there are limits to this way of thinking. Yes.
What would be nice is if we could actually get him to expound more on like where he is in that conversation process, because we're going on little snippets of conversation here. I see openings, but I also I hear your doubts, and yeah.
And I'm not saying that. I still think it's. I really applaud his mind and the way it works, and I think the way that he's come to what he's come to, using his own ideas, is really commendable, and I really enjoyed listening to the way that he's set that out. But I think this whole video kind of, for me, it's sort of, there was a little bit of doubt in there, and I think that I'm picking up why that is. And I'm just sounding that out now, as we're meant to.
Yeah, I think you're making a very, very subtle point.
Mm.
And that is a sort of it's a razor's edge point, because what you're saying could sound like a a substitute paradigm that is equally caught in in its own sort of doctrinal or dogmatic structure that has its own limits. But this is going to be hard to say in a subtle way. But the thing with anthroposophy is that as it is structured, because it's structured out of life spheres, and out of all of the spheres that engender, out of which life is engendered, say, and the way in which all the spheres work in reciprocity, that it's not bounded by theory, or it's not bounded by certain models that one has to accept in order to advance in knowledge. And that's where I see the limit is in the modality, in the modeling, and the places where one believes the fixed notion. And this is what I was trying to say about the idea that evolution for humanity didn't start until all of nature developed a nervous system somehow, right, for humans to carry around. And it's an understandable sticking point, because of the linear nature of that biological narrative. So, but that doesn't mean, and I agree with Angus. This is beautiful to watch, Greg. In each case, we've noticed it, we've touched it, and said, look, this is a man who's questioning his own processes enough to make some phase shifts in his consciousness. He didn't just say shift; he said shift in consciousness, and I think we all have gone through an experience where we sort of woke up on the other side of a consciousness we no longer were carrying. We were no longer fixed in reality. There's a little bit more reality available to our consciousness, and I think that's opening up for him in an intellectual way, say. But at the same time, if there's an axiomatic structure, a belief system that bounds your reality unnecessarily, say, then we're going to. Then that's what I think you're noticing as the limit from my point of view.
Yeah.
Going to add something there. This is a fruit of my readings from the last week or so. Is and the article that you referred to, Kate, earlier, is I've been reading a lot of the Life Divine, and it's like reading, in parts, a poetic version of the Philosophy of Freedom. It really is quite an amazing experience. This needs to be treated like in its own video and properly, because there's so much to go into. So the reservations that you're expressing, as I dig deeper into Aurobindo, those in Aurobindo's case, they disappear for me. Where Greg is in this, I have no idea to what extent he's invested time and energy into that, or whether, as you rightly say, Kate, he's just like adapted a paradigm that suits his narrative at the moment. I don't know, but reading Aurobindo, informing myself about him, whoa, there is so much profound stuff going on in there. So that's going to have to be a topic we come back to. But yeah, thanks for adding that, Kate and Jeff, because just because you buy into a couple of concepts, it doesn't mean you've adapted a spiritual scientific way of viewing the world, taking the spirit world as a as a reality. Did you want to say something, okay, before?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to articulate it better, but I think the reason I get doubtful is because it feels like Kantian splitting of ways of knowing. Do you know what I mean? Like we can use a certain way of knowing for science and a certain way of knowing for the interior sciences, and these are split apart and they're dualized and they're polarized. And in anthroposophy, and I'm sure in Aurobindo as well, because I mean Steiner takes a lot of his concepts from the Indian mystic traditions. I mean, in theosophy, there was a big connection. That it's that nested thing again. It's the physical matter is nested in the life, which is nested in mindedness. I don't know if I would call it that, but the astral, which is nested in, which is transcended and surrounded by the thinking capacity of human beings and the spiritual capacity of human beings. It's not I use one way of thinking for objects and one way of thinking for subjects. You know what I mean? Obviously it does occur like that, but it's not, when I listen to Greg speaking, it just sort of seemed to be another way of expressing what Kant wanted to do, which was separate the two. I feel like I'm just contradicting myself because I can't articulate the difference, but I know that it's there.
This is a good time to introduce our next video series, which will start with the sentence, "The world suffers an unhealthy faith in Kant," and we all are suffering it to some degree because we're all dualists to some degree, and so one can forgive Greg here his process within academia, and he described his parents, that he was trained. And I don't mean trained in the discipline sense. I mean trained in the almost animalistic training sense that we train children with, as opposed to education. And so, but it's a sophisticated, animalistic's not the right word, the mechanistic framework. And it's hard to break out of that. And psychology obviously needs to. So I think that it's understandable and it's helpful to see the limits and what we're really actually. I love this because this is where in this video series we start to emerge as spiritual scientists, where we say what is missing from this fourfold scientific picture that you're bringing is what the interior sciences are, and that what we are presupposing, say, or its living relationship with our knowledge bodies are saying, is that we start with spiritual science, and then that informs paradigmatically how the sciences are then viewed, but also practiced. And the future needs to be the sciences need to be infused with spiritual science, because that's the epistemological paradigmatic shift that is being called for.
Well,
you wrote my segue for me there. Oh, sorry, Kate. Sorry, go on.
No, go on. Don't worry.
You wrote my segue for me twice there, Jeff. Transforming into a new perspective of reality and phase shift. I think phase shift is actually where the last word of where I stop the next video clip, because there's a really interesting point being made by John here. It's like this really important question: what is real, and how do we transform our perspective on what reality really is? So, and from our perspective, obviously, that is like growing into a spiritual conception of reality. Okay, so let's play this. You can see it, yes?
So normally people ground real in terms of the sort of maximal coherence, maximal like in pragmatic sense, right? Mm-hmm. Maximal coherence of intelligibility. So people will typically say dreams aren't real because this doesn't fit into, the intelligibility by which I make sense of the world, et cetera, et cetera. Or I took it, that I was drunk and that wasn't real because. And what's really weird about these higher states of consciousness is people go into experiences they've never had before because they're leaving behind the normalization of the nattering narrative ego. They get these experiences that do not fit in, that are almost lacking in content, and then they say this. They say that is actually more real than all of this. They reverse the judgment. Normally, they use all of this to judge things and to either accept them or reject them. They take that and they feel they're fully justified in taking that experience to reject or at least call into question. And this is not just statements. I mean, the research shows that what they do is they attempt to transform their relationships, their roles, their identity, their understanding of the world so they can come into increasing conformity to the ontonormative, to the really real. And that goes back to what I was saying before about like the really real. The realness is this thing at which you ought, and this is the way it is. They come together in a profound way. And the mystical experience, I'm arguing now, I'm making an argument, is exactly the experience in which that underlying oneness is exemplified in a way that drives people into profound transformation.
I 100% agree. I'll shut up in a sec, but I'll just echo that, because for me, then, what you're in your language, what emerges is a new schematic of the perspectival, participatory, intuitive grip of the world, and then that grounds people in is a phase shift that affords a new transformation in that intuition. And that is, I mean, we're primates that are fundamentally anchored to that. And
Jeff, you were shaking your head. I guess you better go first.
Just the axiomatic presupposition that we are primates.
Yeah, that shook my head too.
It's factually not true. It's not abhorrent idea to me. I'd be fine if that were the case, but it's actually more true to say it's the reverse. That there's this humanoid element in everything that exists, if we understand what human beings are, which is a very complex and originating an original reality. Say, it's not an important point. I just wanted to take a shot at that.
It's interesting the different things that we pull out of exactly the same content, isn't it? I'm hearing something. I recognize what you're saying there, Jeff, but I'm hearing something completely different. It's a recognition that we've got to shift our consciousness, that the current models aren't sufficient. We need to be far more engaged in this effort. And John talking about this strange thing where it's like what most people are calling it's like illusory or imagination or fantasy or something like that appears like it to the empiricist, actually turns out to be more real for these people. And he talks about the research that supports these findings. And what it's talking to, what both John and Greg are talking to here, from my perspective, is a recognition that there is, without a shadow of doubt, a higher reality. And as people interested in the question of metapsychology, we have to understand that better, and we have to find ways of making that accessible to people so that they actually, what most people consider to be ridiculous fantasy and sort of like, no, this is a better model than the current psychological crap model that they're all referring to. The same type of, when we talked about Kuhn a couple of videos ago, it's like paradigm shifts, in the same way that like Einstein represented a paradigm shift in physics. Einstein represents a paradigm shift away from Newtonian physics. I think they're honestly trying to like lead psychology in that direction. Yeah, we're with them all the way on that, aren't we?
Yeah, I fully support it, and I grok what you're saying, and I also think the way in which you're describing it, which is why I propose that we engage with these folks in this manner that we have, and this is an opportunity to call out where it is we see the things that they could take a light year leap ahead if they just engaged Steiner. So imagine Rudolf Steiner and Sri Aurobindo talking, and that we were watching them talk, and they were talking about the origin of their ideas and the metastructure of the psychospiritual organization, and they were talking about mystics. They would both go, yeah, these guys are not quite correct about what mysticism is, because mysticism is the experience of oneness, but it's experience of oneness in a personal manner, deeply personal manner, and it's an important half of the equation, the interior sciences, right? That what you get when you get there is not Atman. You get a deeply personal experience that you could never put into words as a valid experience, but merely personal. It's not a transpersonal experience. Or that can be articulated. At least it's probably a transpersonal experience, in that we are microcosms, and you're exposed to this through the personal gateway. You're exposed to this massively complex universe, something like that, right? So Steiner talks about in I forget the other lecture series, but it talks about. It's the Metamorphosis of the Soul, reissued as the Transformation of the Soul, interestingly enough. And he talks about the other direction, which is out into the world, and the plurality that develops, as opposed to the sort of unified experience that's hard to articulate, and is a moment, is a developmental moment. And then there's the pluralism that develops because of the multiplicity of the world's existence in a similar way, and it's the bringing the two together, those two experiences together, that is spiritual science, that is anthroposophy, that is then you can see that what they're saying is that there's levels of initiatory experiences in the consciousness above the everyday waking consciousness that we have. And I know we know this, but it's an easy thing to communicate right at this point, right? So if you look into Steiner, what you're going to see is that this ground has already been investigated, and if we saw Steiner or Aurobindo talking about it, they would be talking about it in very sophisticated ways. And the thing I was thinking about earlier that I didn't say was that if Greg's going to read Sri Aurobindo, he also needs to take up the practices that Sri Aurobindo did with a group of practitioners, as going through a peer review process, say, that's been happening for 2,500 years, out of that culture, and can teach us a lot. Like I'm also thinking of Arthur Zient's work with the wonderful
Catching the Light
physicist from Amherst, Massachusetts, who was the head of the Anthroposophical Society of North America for a while, convened a contemplative life and mind group over a series of videos and conferences, with the Dalai Lama in the room, and the Dalai Lama's co-meditants, say, and discussing the tradition of the interior sciences coming out of that tradition with neurologists and physicists mostly, and psychologists. So like, this is the kind of convening that science, that the psychology, that science as a psychology will that's what am I trying to say? This is the kind of peer review that all of science could take a page from.
You are the perfect segue machine today, Jeff. Because this is what we're going to be. This is the next clip. But I do want to remind listeners, viewers, that the point that I'm just about to make is something that we made several videos back in this series. This point that Stein is crystal clear about, that there will be a time in the future when it's like the clarity that is currently perceived around mathematics will also be there for the psyche, for the inner life, or the interior sciences, as you're calling it, and as they also call it here in the video. So Zak's going to be talking to that exact point in the next video.
Other places too, when the British got up into Tibet and you have this infusion, but you get this meeting of quote unquote East and West, right? And so like there's this lineage between Aurobindo and Vivekananda in particular, and it's that same attempt that Aurobindo is trying to do, is bring the East and the West quote unquote together. Aurobindo was a political radical during the occupation of India by the British, and before Gandhi was organizing guerrilla warfare, was imprisoned for a bomb plot. In isolation, had a vision of Vivekananda, who came to him. So we'll talk about visions. We'll talk about non-conceptual awareness, right? Higher states of consciousness versus just altered states of consciousness. So there's a lot of distinctions there, and Ken can help there. But so Aurobindo goes on to, flee to French India. Would later say that during the time that he was agitating, guerrilla warfare made sense. But by the time Gandhi got to it, then Gandhi was appropriate. And so, in any case, the point I'm making here is that he was trying to bridge East and West. So he was trying to do like Vivekananda. He was trying to say, you guys think you do science? We do a deeper science. And we've been doing it for thousands of years. It was part of
a greater psychology.
It was part of the Bengal Renaissance. It was part of the encounter of the British with not Native Americans, but with the Indian subcontinent, which had civilizations that had been living on it with high culture and mathematics and all of these things. And so there was this encounter, which resulted in the Bengal Renaissance, and Aurobindo, Ramakrishna, and Ramana Maharishi, among Vivekananda and others, are like these key figures where like Jung and other people are like, whoa, what are those guys doing? And James similarly. And Aurobindo makes this argument, like, listen, it's the interior sciences. Ken picks this up, and we're working this with Gaffney in the neo-perennialism, that, the argument against it is that, well, your subjective experience and my subjective experience are different. And Aurobindo's like, well, not if you're meditating well, and you're working with you're working with a community of practitioners who are all meditating in the same way, and you're talking about your practice. And so Aurobindo tries to paint this picture of a kind of like verifiabilism within the domain of interiority through collective communities of practice. And Ken kind of plugs right in there, and he says there's a
What I think about here, it takes me back to it's this wonderful work we've done together, right? It's like we're developing a sort of connective tissue in the very thing that we're doing over time, starting with the riddles of philosophy, right? This connective tissue has to do with what was happening in the 19th century at that time, right? Because that Bengal Renaissance created an influx of and it was happening before that already, but it's like the East was visiting the West at that point, and the West was developing this psychology, right, that could have been a contender, you know what I mean? Should have been a contender. It should have been a phenomenological science that picked up what the East was bringing, but it only picked up part of it and ran it through the psychological scrim. And so we ended up with the denial of the self, right? From a spiritual, like discipline standpoint, like you have to deny your desire, that it was sort of a cheapened version run through psychology. And then we had the other very damaging notion of the unconscious, the world will. I'm nobody. The world is something that flows through me, and then that gets all, we've talked about the ways, and that becomes fractured as relates to self distrust, and then bring in this soup, this linear evolutionary biology picture that we've emerged out of nature, and we have all of the terrible Hobbesian destructive tendencies that nature has, which it doesn't, which isn't true, but yeah. So I just wanted to. It gets nice and messy there in the 19th century, doesn't it?
You want to add something there, Kate?
No, I don't. I don't know. I don't know much about the Eastern traditions, and I kind of get my distance. So it's interesting to hear about, but I don't really have anything to build upon.
So I'm going to take the words that you used there, Jeff. This out of nature. How if we look at the Goethean scientific perspective, a Goethean's like fundamental idea is that nature created us so that it could become aware of its own wonderful nature. So a simplified version. And from what I've this particularly is, there's the scene from the Walpurgis Night dream in Faust, towards the end of Faust 2, which is supposedly it's like this dialogue with nature, where she's expressing it's like these ideas. What is remarkable for me in the context of this conversation is that it was actually that key idea. I happened to run across a video. I hadn't at this stage read any Aurobindo, and I just like picked a clip on YouTube and thought, I'll listen to that. And there it was. Exactly that idea. And this is one of the things that surprised me so much in the past week, is that I'm experiencing this conceptual clarity that slowly dawns on us. It's like the more we involve ourselves with spiritual scientific writings, with the philosophical writings as well. These are also like methods of training for conceptual clarity. Once those concepts are in you, then you're able to recognize them when they're also elsewhere. And this is truly why I'm becoming so interested in Aurobindo, because it's not just I've been listening to the Upanishads for a long time. I think I can hear the truths sort of like running through those, but listening through Aurobindo's voice, I'm beginning to see like this deep, profound overlap, which I'm only beginning to discover. But if you think about like some of the essential parts of what anthroposophy means, it's like the philosophy of freedom is at the heart of it. Bang, 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 bang. It's like I'm reading this, and these concepts are popping out of the page as I'm reading it, or when I'm listening to it. And then this Goethean notion, which is also alive in anthroposophy as well, that we are spiritual beings who are slowly waking up to our own divine natures. That's there, and that's also there. It's like stated clearly in a much more poetic way, but the same notion, argued from it's like a tradition that's this old, is also present there. So it's going to be really interesting for me at least, and and if others are interested, to pursue this angle, because I think there's going to be a lot of mileage in recognizing how these concepts that we work with in anthroposophy are also there to an amazing extent in our opinion. Not all of those, and I haven't read all of this stuff, so I can't comment like too thoroughly, but how they also become useful for people like Greg, John, and Zak, who are trying to also refine their conceptual understanding, refine conceptual clarity in themselves, so that they can then recognize it in the data they see outside in the real world, in reality.
Yeah, it is the whole point of, I guess, these conversations that we've been having, is to discover how, because anthroposophical concepts are just embedded in experiencing life and humanness, they will eventually appear in other places, and it is very interesting to me. It's interesting, yeah, it's interesting, but I guess it doesn't have the same hook in my lip.
And a week ago, it wouldn't have for me either.
Yeah.
And that's the real. I've been bowled over. I mean, I've invested quite a bit of time in listening and reading and this type of thing, but it's it's quite the experience.
I think it's important for anthroposophy that such a thing exists, in my humble opinion, about the state of this movement that is still very young, and it's something new, offered out of ancient traditions, say, and Aurobindo also is offering something new out of his tradition, and there's something about it that's not that let's say has its own limits as relates to modern consciousness. I'm just dipping my toe in the water, so I'm sure that there's way more to offer than what I'm describing. However, out of anthroposophy comes pharmaceuticals, homeopathic pharmaceuticals, and psychospiritual medicine, say, and a psychosophy, and an astrological cosmological picture that is its own unique hyper contemporary, ahead of its time even, right? And out of it comes forms of it comes an educational system that now is around the world, an agricultural system that is adopted increasingly around the world, but also was the basis for what we know as organic agriculture. It's what we it was crypto smuggled Steiner in without sort of, right. So this is what I want to get to here. So because we're so embarrassed of Steiner as a Western culture, is embarrassed of figures like Steiner, because we can't have those gurus in our midst. We can't have these mystics in our midst. We can't have that. But those Easterns, wow, they're amazing, right? Like they're just like yes, Aurobindo. Never mind that India has a caste system, and that there's all sorts of problems associated with that. We just forget about that, or even there's an ideological framework where that sort of hails Marx as a sort of alternative hero to capitalism, and then yet Marx was a vicious categorical racist. In Douglas Murray's book War on the West, he talks about he quotes these long vitriolic spewing that Marx does about as relates to racial hatred, say, something like that. So it's really interesting that and again, Angus, I'm not saying like I think I'm talking to the importance of it. I know it sounds like I'm complaining again, but I really we need to accept the work of Rudolf Steiner in the West in the way we would accept Aurobindo, and we need them talking to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And-
Absolutely. Sorry, go on, Kate.
And as Western people, we need to listen to the voices that came out of our history. This is my stance, and it has been. I haven't changed my mind ever. I've always believed this. And it's caused probably bad one-sidedness that I will develop out of eventually. But I just find it really hypocritical when we, as much as I love Vervaeke, he's always talking about the Zen Buddhists and how, the Zen Buddhists said a lot of the things like Jesus said. And I said, and then that makes me think, okay, then why don't you like Jesus? As an example. And I would love to know, I've been trying to find, but I can't find anything. What, because I know that you said that he's kind of allergic to Steiner or doesn't trust Steiner or something. And I'd love to know the context and why he said that. And I would like to hear these people talk about that more. And I understand that it's the legacy of Theosophy and some of the movements, the spiritualist movements that were kind of popping up as a reaction to the hyper mechanistic revolution of the 1800s. And we kind of hate both extremes. And it's unfair that Steiner gets thrown in with Blavatsky most of the time. But we can move beyond that. I mean, we can all have an intelligent conversation and stop calling him a mad occultist. But yeah, I'm also much more interested in, I suppose, the practical elements of anthroposophy at the moment in my own development and understanding of it. And so, as much as I believe there are higher worlds, it's not really my priority to establish, which is why I'm kind of quiet on this video, because I just don't have many opinions. But I do have an opinion on the way that we are.
I would like to offer like a possible explanation, because I do think Steiner talks about this. Why are people like this incapable is the wrong word, unwilling to embrace the conceptual clarity of spiritual science? It's fear. There are two. There are two. So like there was two schooling. You've got the inner mysteries and you've got the outer mysteries. The inner mysteries of the microcosm and the mysteries of the macrocosm. And particularly, is the macrocosm is something that is more like of a northern stream, and the instinctual reaction to moving out into the macrocosm is fear. Inwards, it's shame. Outwards, it's like the soul reaction to like this dissipation out into this dissolution out into the macrocosmos as we lose ourselves is fear. And
did you say shame in the other direction?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Ah, interesting. Okay.
But I really, and Steiner he's talked about this many times, it is fear of the spiritual, because it means ultimately giving up your ego, not your proper ego, but your lower ego. But if your lower ego is all you think you have, then you feel justified in your fear. But what people who aren't like embedded in like the conceptual richness that anthroposophy offers, is that this ego, and this is Aurobindo as well. Mind, supermind is the same concept there, that we're in a transitional stage another area of crossover with Steiner in, is it chapter 12 or chapter 13, where he's talking about Darwinism? But the picture, we've got sort of the same Nietzschean picture going on with Steiner and Aurobindo, but Nietzschean is a negative one, whereas both Steiner and Aurobindo, what they're positing is that we are products of nature, and nature that is trying to transform and transcend itself. And whilst we are like stuck in this lower ego state and believing that that's all there is to life because we only believe in what our senses show us, it's like somebody who starts coming along and talking about spiritual realities is going to scare the shits out of us, or many people.
And what my question then is, why are people less afraid of the way that, why are white Western people less afraid of the way Oriental people talk about spirituality? And the way I'm going to answer it is that it's less scary because it's kind of over there, and you can always sort of come back to your normal life because it's, you know, it's what the Indians do. And it's interesting and we can use it, but we can come back to it. Is that what it is? Where if it's a Western tradition, and something that we inherit, we can't run away from it, and we can't face our fear properly. And this is my problem with perennialism, is that it's always on the outside and it's never participatory.
Yeah. Wow. Very well said.
Good point.
Very, very, very well said. I would say that there's a third element here, and it's built into the modernist paradigm, and it comes because of the split that happened with humankind that I've labored to try to describe previous to this, and it's probably comes before that somewhere, and it's not a problem necessarily. But it needs to be observed so that we can get past it as a culture. And that's it's the duality, and the duality creates a deep self-loathing. It's more than shame in this case. It's between shame and fear is the self-sabotaging approach to existence that the West itself has, right? And it iterates in every version of what we're doing. Like we create a science that creates a medicine that is causing more harm than good, right? That if that's not self-loathing, I'm not quite sure what is. Like, we know that we should be that there are ways in which we should be educating our children, like just very common sense ways you hear people talk about all the time. Yet we double down on these school systems that are just murdering nervous systems. Say, you know, it's clinical schizophrenia, as Ian McGilchrist describes it. So when I mentioned Douglas Murray's book, his is a politically motivated reasoning. He'd like to go back to the Enlightenment in a certain sense. He's a sort of neo-Enlightenment atheist fellow, and as many of those neo-atheists are, that whether they fall on the liberal or the conservative side, he's a conservative, and a brilliant writer, and a sardonic and funny and just fantastic person to engage with at a dinner party, I'm quite sure. But he doesn't go deep enough as to why there is a war on the West, but he does describe that war on the West as an internal war, that we are at war with ourselves, right? And so now we're creating technologies that are, sort of almost ensuring we're going to have a war of all against all, in a sense. That's so beautifully said, Kate. Like I'm with all of us on this, I think.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about it that way. That's good. So clear.
So we're going to the bit that you wanted me to put in here, Jeff, which is actually more about the interior sciences. I chopped that in half. That's a part of the video. So we're going to listen to them continue to talk for another couple of minutes about the interior sciences, what that actually means in this context.
Through collective communities of practice. Ken kind of plugs right in there, and he says there's a broad empiricism, again echoing William James Wilbur, and he's saying, listen, like anything that is disclosed in first person experience and verified in third person experience and second person experience, which is
dialectic, dialogical.
we're getting into now something that fits these definitions of real.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So once you get the opening of the interior sciences and you say, hey, actually, those dudes in Tibet were doing something really cool. They weren't innovating and like building bombs and stuff, but they were going so deep inside with such rich community practice that they must have discovered something that's true about the nature of reality and at least the human mind, right? And so Aurobindo was basically saying, hell yeah, we did. And there's a very rich architecture of mental phenomena that's discoverable from these interior sciences and their rigorous practices. And so this results in, it's interesting. So again, James picks up a little bit on this with the broad empiricism and the, you know, the history of the kind of like diversity of religious experience, that once you start to study this stuff, then it's just the gates open.
Right.
And this is like the problem with psi phenomenon and all of that stuff, is that like it's actually kind of a Pandora's box ontologically. So it gets very difficult to handle some of these phenomena. And so that's why Aurobindo's like, well, that's why you need to change your ontology. You're not going to be able to understand these things. And so he posits the ontology downward, as you postulated, Greg: matter, life, mind. But then he also posits the ontology upward. And here's where we get the full kind of Neoplatonic great chain of being that Aurobindo lays on its side. And he's saying, like Teilhard de Chardin, that like the future's reaching back, bringing us forward. So there's all of these crazy assumptions, which actually, when you really look at cosmological evolution, it's pretty weird and based on a lot of crazy assumptions. So that's not...
That is great. That is just great.
So good.
It is God, I mean, where to start? Like, so there's if the future is pulling us forward to, and I think that there's an epistemological basis in that, in philosophy of freedom, for that, when he deals with purpose, right, and moral imagination, then the interior sciences are revealing things to us that we can then understand, so what I was thinking there is that Steiner talks about directionality in verticality and reciprocally, so involution and evolution, the meristem concept, the rooting and the branching in simultaneity. He also talks about a horizontal, right, and then he also talks about back and the dimensional in the sense of sort of, and everything is like this. Time is like, then to evoke Lorenzo, time is this thing that is co-evolving in a certain sense with us, right? It's like, I don't know, this is mind-blowing to me when I think about time. I just can never get my finger on it, but yes, so here we have, like, okay, we're going to be serious about this, guys, right? So that means we're going to study this, and that we're going to make it, we're going to change our notion of evolution as a linear process that resulted in epiphenomena of consciousness, of just arising out of some crypto normalizing of intelligent design.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so wonderful to hear Zak bringing in something again that's like, because of the concepts we've already developed, like outside of this conversation, we immediately recognize the value of what he's talking about here. It's not just anthroposophy that's realized that there's a higher aspect to us, and has also Greg, it's like systematized it through good meditative practice, and it's like the witnessing that they're talking about. But these are products of the interior sciences, and what is what is so hardening from our perspective is we find these mapping so closely. So it's coming from a completely different tradition. What we've seen demonstrated as an essential part of our nature in the philosophy of freedom, and then onwards into anthroposophy, we see also the same insights using different language and but sometimes and often different justifications for it, but nevertheless describing the same inner reality that we feel we see in ourselves, and which is true to anthroposophical ways of seeing the world. Yeah, it's a powerful sentence, isn't it? You need to change your ontology, and you need to change your conception of what is real. One of the topics we didn't, going back to the last video, the only topic that I thought was of any interest for my personal sake was when they talked about moral reality, but we never got that far. Here we're talking about this, like this inner reality that in the modern scientific paradigm is this emergent behavior, but it's all just invented. It's all imagination. They're saying that there are systems, there are ways of looking at the world in which your very conception of what reality is can be profoundly changed. And this is the goal of their series. They're trying to map out, describe, make accessible. It's like what this more complete version of reality is. And I think it's a shame. It's like this is at the end of the series and they're only getting to the interesting bit. Yeah, this is the bit where the work starts. Okay, yeah, right. Come on, describe the system and relate it to life, like anthroposophy has been doing for the last 100 years, with it, like the initiatives you were talking about, so like linking it to agriculture, schooling, medicine, and all of these different fields. Make these ideas real. And this is unfortunately where they bail out on the conversation, and where a real conversation needs to be had. But as Greg was alluding to earlier, I mean, you've got these institutions, they're not interested. It's like behind the scenes, they might say, oh yeah, this is interesting. There could be something in it. But outwardly, they can't give it any credence.
So this is really important, what you're saying. There's so much there. There are three things I want to bring in. I want to bring in this notion of the first, second, and third person perspectives, or epistemics even. There's the idea that Charles Kettering brings, which is a problem well understood is half solved, and a problem not understood is unsolvable, right? So they've laid out the problem set for us beautifully, and we can step into that with the I would say even a greater understanding of the ways in which, in some ways, there's, as academic participants, they're participating in the problem set, because the problem set has to do with academia being closed off in the modernist paradigm, not having a way to self-correct, which is why we're self-destructing. And self-destroying, not just self-destructing. But what's happening now is more and more people are knocking at the door, knocking at the gates of academia and saying, you people are bozos, right? Like you don't know what you're doing in your disciplines. You don't talk to each other. There's no interdisciplinary approach. And not only that, what anthroposophy offers, besides a high level understandings and sharing, is that it's for everybody. It's for every single person. It's difficult, just like any discipline is difficult, but it's a discipline that incorporates all of the disciplines, which is why it can produce real life self-renewing right? It's not self-checking, it's self-renewing, because it's related to these realities, the first, second, and third person realities. Our culture only allows for third person realities. Everything else is not is either merely subjective, or the interjective is not noticed as probably the most important reality in a certain sense, because what we understand interjective is the intersubjective is the potentiality of Christ consciousness, right? That our heritage has to do with a collective intelligence that we have to tap into through a first person experience, and that's verifiable in a third person experience. Not start with a third person experience, right?
I'd like to come in there, Jeff. You said some really important things there. Go back to when I was a wee kid. I remember reading about these amateur scientists in the 16th, 17th, 18th century and 19th century. It's like thinking the world was sort of like it was open. You didn't have to. These were all hobby scientists. All of these people, so like creating conceptual clarity about how the world operates. Okay, it's the material world, but that needed to be dealt with as well. And there was a sort of it's like a sadness in my soul. So you have to be. Only big institutions can do science now. And what you're touching on, Jeff, there is every single one of us can be a scientist. In actual fact, if we are going to be free, every individual has the responsibility of becoming their own inner scientist and discovering the truths of what they really are, because it cannot come from an external authority. We have to work with these concepts, and through our own through our own work and effort, recognize the truth value of these concepts. And when Kate, when you talk about like how much joy anthroposophy brings to you in your descriptions, this is the same is true for me, and this is particularly in this field. We are breaking new ground for. So when we do this individually, we're breaking ground from ourselves. When we do this in conversation, we're sharing that groundbreaking so that other people might also sort of like say, shit, they're saying something interesting there. Oh, perhaps that's got to do something with like how I see life, or perhaps I need to like revisit how I see things, or a particular concept that's brought into bearing that can have value. Is difficult work, just like science was difficult for the amateur scientists of the earlier centuries. I think just to finish off there, one way of describing what as like a spiritual scientist is we're all like fortunately becoming individual amateur scientists again, and arriving at similar, it's like greater insights that we couldn't have even begun to imagine 100 years ago.
Yeah, I remember when I read Truth and Science, I started asking my friends, do you guys think we could do science without knowing anything else that a scientist ever said? Can we just go about and set about trying to find out about the world with, what the world is and what we have to know about it and our ways of knowing about it? Could we do that? And people would mostly say, no, Kate, you're crazy. But but I was like, yes, we can. The secret is we can. And I went before, because I was thinking just before you spoke, Angus, it was amazing. It was a really beautiful moment of synchronicity and conversation where I was thinking I'd really want to hear something from Angus's biography, because I think it would show me why he's interested in, like, why you were interested in. You said yourself, like, this realm of anthroposophy is what really excites you and what really brings you joy. And I was thinking, I want to hear memory or a transformative experience from you to understand that better in the way, because we got that from Jeff a few videos back about when he was talking about the insects under the rock and the world of conversation that he was invited to in later years. I think it's so interesting. So it's great that I had that idea and then you immediately said it. Beautiful.
Thanks, Kate.
And good, now that it's silent, I guess I might give you mine. When I was really young, maybe 10, I really thought the world was going to end. I was convinced that the world was going to end. And I suppose this is one of my transformative experiences. But it wasn't overnight. It took a long time to get over this dreadful fear. And I started to identify it with, I guess, deconstructive, existentialist ways of dealing with it, ways of making sense of this terrible feeling that the world was going to end and the world was the meaning of the world was going to fall out, and that total random destruction was inevitable. And I was really believed in this for a long time. And I suppose the reason Anthroposophy gives me joy is because in every moment of transformation in my life that I think counts is when I fully agreed with myself that doing things deliberately and with purpose matters. And then it does create that it is the point to do things with purpose, and it isn't all just that every purposeful action that I make is changing myself and developing and transforming the world, which is, I think, why my interest in anthroposophy is sort of much more in the practical sciences of the pedagogy and agriculture and the arts, because it's something that I can really hold. And I am terrified of the void of the unknown. Like you were saying, that when you were saying people are scared of the spiritual world, definitely I am. I'm definitely scared of it. Probably because of some kind of spiritual experience that I had that I psychologically explained in a strange way when I was a child. It's interesting, right? It's so interesting that these developmental transformative moments shape our engagement with anthroposophy, and that it's so wide and broad that it can account for all of that and can welcome it all in. That's great.
That reminds me of a parallel experience I had when I was about 10. Something about 10 years old, I don't know. And it was actually about the world. So, I talked about how I'd noticed with my sister's friends and their relationship patterns, how it's like that pattern is an example of the way the world works as a whole. Like this is like infrastructural, this is my language now. I wasn't like that then. I was like, yeah, that's an example of the way everything's one and all the patterns are repeated, or something sort of fractally like that. Like, again, none of that language is in my head. But I also remember around that time, based on that, like, oh God, this is going to get me in trouble.
Yeah.
Like they're gonna get me if I pop up in that way, like with an understanding of the way that the world works in an intertwined way. The powers that be are not going to like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember. I mean, that was really that was like, it didn't create a fear necessarily, but it was like, oh well, let me note that, right.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to have to add another biographical bit here, because there was also something going on when they were talking. The clip before we watched, they were talking about our dreams are real, and is an illusion real, is hallucination real, and all of these type of things. And the immediate experience, obviously, is that they are real. But this This occurred to me. There's an outside chance I have told it before in a different video, but not in this series. But it feels relevant in the context of what is real. Because when I would have been about 11, 12, 13, don't know exactly. I had one morning I woke up and I'd had this really strong dream. Can't remember any of the details now, but was surprised that it was more real, more vivid than the other dreams that you normally have. But I didn't pay it a great deal of attention. And then the next morning I woke up and it was sort of like, whoa, that was like watching the next episode in a series. that dream was a continuation of what I was dreaming the night before. There was a continuity in there. And the third morning I woke up and I had exactly the same experience. And as I recognized what had been going on those 3 mornings, the question I asked myself was, where is reality? The one that I've just woken up into, or the one that I've just left? And this is where there's like the anthroposophical realm of concepts begins to help you reconcile these. It's not a duality. It's like it's a total experience. These are different realms of experience with different levels of consciousness. So that instead of I'm not going to say I'm not confused about things, but like on where questions like that arise, it's sort of like, no, something was going on in my psycho-spiritual nature, which I don't dismiss dreams as not being real. A lot of people, like with us, like a materialist, dreams aren't real. End of story. It's like when you take on board spiritual scientific concepts, your conception of what is real grows, and in that, as that realm sort of like unfolds and grows outwards, what you previously dismissed as unreal becomes part of the fabric of reality, which still needs clarity around, but you're no longer making the fatal error of saying that's not real.
Yeah, and we have concepts to properly place them in levels of realness with dreams. I mean, we have the idea that dreams occur to us the same way feelings are occurring to us, and they're totally personal, but also not in our control necessarily. They're not like our thinking is. I mean, we can control feelings and dreams to a certain extent, but they're not free acts the way thinking is. And so that one description of what a dream is and what a feeling is opens up so much, so many ways to explore what experience is and how it kind of is different shades of real interacting with each other.
Okay, so we've identified that this is where they should have started the series. Zak goes on to talk a little bit here about Wilber. He's been talking about Wilber's taxonomy of inner experience, which I think it would have been really interesting to go into. But let's listen to what Zak has to say here about some of the fruits of these interior sciences. I think there's some important stuff in here.
That's the other thing to remember here is like you read Aurobindo, you think you get it, but probably not. Like that's a mental projection of an experience which you haven't had. The years of meditation and practice in religious community to attain the kinds of insights that Aurobindo is speaking about are also in the model of intersubjective confirmation of first-person experience. It has to be a community of the adequate.
Yep, totally.
Right? So if you've been meditating for 20 years and you start to have meditative experiences and you go to your colleagues who've never meditated and you say, hey, I had this experience. there's no way for them to understand what the hell you're talking about. If you go to other meditators, even in other traditions, who meditated for as long as seriously, and you describe that experience, you can start to be like, oh, that's, and you can start to talk about your shared experience of the first person phenomena to get at this reality, which is what the inner sciences are trying to discover. So yeah, there's this tricky moves that need to be made to reintroduce some of these as valid trajectories of exploration. Again, I think Maslow is worth mentioning here, because this is about the advances in positive psychology.
Yeah, book I'm reading right. Other book is Transcend by Scary.
Yeah, see, but that's
basically
like,
an updated.
this is
an interesting update about it.
Yeah, there's issues with that book too, because he's trying to resolve it in a non-religious manner.
So,
Whereas Aurobindo says there's no other solution but to do it
right.
in a religious manner. Yeah.
I wish I could. There's no other solution but, and then because Greg's talking, he sort of like he fades out. But he's making a really important point, I think, here, which they've talked about in other videos without exploring, is the importance of the religion here. They dance around this subject without actually getting deep in as to how these religious concepts, religious experience, tie in to the psycho-spiritual reality that is supposed to be the basis for their transformational psychology. Here, I think it's telling that there's no other solution. And then he fades out. I don't know. You didn't either of you? If I just play that last 5 seconds again, see if you can make out what he's saying here. Hold on. Can you make out what he's saying? There's no other solution but to.
It didn't play back here.
Oh, sorry. Hold on. I'll just do that again. Okay, here it comes.
Yeah, there's issues with that book too, because he's trying to resolve it in a non-religious manner. Whereas Aurobindo says there's no other solution but to do it in a religious manner. Yeah.
Well,
To do it in a religious manner, I said.
Yeah.
So Zak's own triple of transcendence, ensoulment, and skill development. He proposes that we speak in symbolic language when we're dealing with the reality of the realm out of which the transcendent, as he describes it, in other words, the spiritual realm, that we use symbolic language. And Steiner himself actually says this in the Transformations of the Soul, when he's talking about language. That first lecture in the volume 2 is just packed with the answers to these questions that you would derive out of Zak's presentation, say. This is that's what he's saying. He's saying that the only solution for originating reality. So this is another thing about the modernist culture, is that we abandoned origin, right? And Steiner's point in Spiritual Science as a Foundation for Social Forms is that we will have to remember origins if we're going to survive and not keep producing self-destructive ideologies. That origin is that which happened before birth, and we come in this life with a continuity in pictures of the life we just lived, and it's shot through the prism of the Atman, Buddhi, and life spirit organization that is at once our future, but also the organization of the higher selves that we step through, we move through as we traverse out after death and then traverse back through. So the light shines through these three, and then they live in our will impulses as the seeds for the life after the next go around between death and rebirth.
Angus, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I do. Symbols. Concepts, mental pictures are symbols. They're reflections of. Did you fall off your chair there, Kate?
Yeah.
Where do I want to go? What you're saying about symbols there is so important, Jeff, and I want to relate this back to the philosophy of freedom here. That symbols have to be understood in the terms that they are symbolizing something that is real, in the same sense that we understand that a mental picture is a dead, devitalized version of a living concept. And where did that living concept come from? It came from, it was given to us through intuition, through the universal activity of thinking, which we give birth to in ourselves. And in a certain way, that this is one of the ways of understanding the value of this deadening process that we have to go through. That the awakening of the inner mental life to dead mental images eventually leads us to ask, but what's the reality behind this symbol? These symbols are of value, but they are of limited value because they only indicate the source from which they arise. So one of the tricky conversations that, if we were to take Zak at his word, is this: how do you, as an individual or a group of people, ensure that you use those symbols in a healthy way to access the more complete reality that they are referring to, and not just get stuck in the symbol or the word. So I think he's I was actually, when I was listening to this, I was also thinking about Lorenzo. You said I channeled Lorenzo earlier, but I know he's got he's got a healthy fascination for Pierce and the importance of symbols and how they are indications of something else, and that all language is symbols. But symbols of what? What is the reality that's behind them? What is the reality they're trying to describe? And often we get stuck. It's very easy for us to get stuck in the symbol rather than the reality to which the symbol is referring, or the religious symbol in the context of this conversation. What is the reality that it is pointing towards, encouraging us to access? And perhaps if I just finish off that thought, is this is where this exhortation to leave mental pictures behind, dead, when you're trying to bring these concepts to life in you. It's in the exercises that Steiner gives in Knowledge of the Higher Worlds, what is the first thing you do? You get rid of any mental picture of that, because that's a fossilized form of that concept. So you get rid of the visual, and ultimately you've got to also try and hold your focus of concentration without the picture and without even the word, to get access to come into contact with, to intuit what is behind this symbol. So there's this erasing process that has to go on there, so that something new can grow out of it.
I always come back to this for me. Something new just arose for me. First of all, I want to bookmark that for a hot second, because I'm going to come right back to it. But there's a difference between metaphor and symbol. And metaphor is something you do in the ensoulment process, according to Zak. And I like that he makes that distinction. Now, I think he's yet to develop his idea of what transcendence is, and as a as epistemological process and ontology. But philosophy of freedom has the epistemology of the transcendent. It's already there. And so, and Riddles of Philosophy does as well. So the idea at the end of Riddles of Philosophy and that's shot through in Philosophy of Freedom is that this provisional picture is drawn, and the symbol is transparent, and it's important that it's operationally derived, say. And what happens then is that the mental picture does need to fall away, but what arises is the imaginal, is the imagination. And so when the imagination rises, for the initiatory experience to continue, you have to also quiet the imagination. So there's a moment when you have to kill the imagination. Well, that's got to be hard, because like things have been revivified, and you really want to hold on to that, right? And so then what happens is the next phase, and this is, you guys know this, but this is for the three of them. The next phase is very discernively that something like a tone arises that tells you the truth in pure information. And so it's no longer a subjective experience, and it's no longer a symbol. It's like what Kate described color as, right? Color's not a symbol, and it is a symbol, and something that can be that carries its own message. This is the thing about the differentiation of metaphor and symbol is that symbol is a participatory experience, and metaphor is a descriptive, abstract experience. And this is what also Kate was saying about perennial philosophy, is that it's longing for something that it locks itself out of to some extent. So the new thing for me here is embedded in what I just was saying, which really occurs to me, Angus, when you were talking, that at each phase there needs to be a gate closed before another gate opens, right? There needs to be something shut down, stopped, killed, or lived through as a kind of death of that experience, so that the new experience can arise. So first it's the mental picture and normal everyday consciousness that is obliterated, right? And usually that mental picture is also associated with memory. So I think Steiner talks about taking the potion of oblivion in the esoteric language, that you take your common memory disappears, and a cosmic memory starts to arise in you, something like that. But that idea that at each place where there's a consciousness shift, that there's something that has to be quelled, stopped. It is even true physiologically, because he talks about the way the brain activity is suppressed by the thinking activity that then replaces it, that suppresses it, and then in its place puts itself there. And that's what we're doing normally when we're really thinking. That's even before we've killed the mental picture, and before we've quieted the imaginal.
And in the physiological level, the nerve sense system like suppresses and destroys the life processes in the body, which is why we must go to sleep. Because if we were conscious all the time, we would just become sclerotic and die, because it is a death process. And I hadn't thought about that in the mental, in the, I don't know what I'm going to call that, but the interior levels. But I was thinking with the philosophy of freedom as well, because Zak, the thing that I wanted to pick up about what Zak said is, you can't, reading what Aurobindo brings to us out of his meditation can only, if we don't have that same experience and that same participation, we will only have an intellectual metaphorized understanding. And then it reminded me that the philosophy of freedom exists, and reminded me of what my friend said, that I should not engage with a lot of Steiner's other work until I have kind of metabolized what he's doing in Philosophy of Freedom. And the reason my friend told me to do that, I think, is because it gives me the cognitive development level to begin to sort of protect me and to get me on the right foot to engage with this more complicated work that requires the exercises that Angus was talking about before. And such exercises, when you explain them to me, I find them impossible. But I know that they're not, and they just take practice and participation. But that is from my level of development, they are impossible. So it's what I mean is that it is that idea that you can't just read something and know the truth, because it causes that we're only doing that on an intellectual and mental picture level. I think that's addressed by Steiner. I'm sure it's addressed by Aurobindo as well, but it's baked into his method.
This reminds me of if you don't. Sorry, Kate, were you finished? I wanted to strengthen what you were saying, add to it. That one of these key sentences in the Philosophy of Freedom is if you don't become conscious of the ideas working, you fall into its bondage.
Mm-hmm.
And this is really why people ask why the Philosophy of Freedom is so important. And there are lots of different answers to that question, but one particularly that you're referring to there, I think, is that when you work through the Philosophy of Freedom, what you're doing is you're becoming conscious of what this process of thinking is. And that is just like we go to the gym or we work out to get physically fit. When we put ourselves through the mill of reading the Philosophy of Freedom, we really are strengthening an inner faculty, which, just like training in the gym, doesn't mean you're just strong in the gym. You're strong in the rest of life. And with the Philosophy of Freedom, it is the same. So like you are just generally more adapt and strengthened for dealing with these different ideas that come to you and evaluating them and looking at them in a way that you don't necessarily in a way that you're not necessarily captured by them in the same way that somebody who hasn't developed that inner strength would be,
or rejects them. Like it doesn't.
Yeah.
It's also a
good point.
It's also a sort of Nautilus plausibility training, right? It's a training in an open mind, but not a passive open mind, but an active open mind, like the larynx is not a passive speech organ, or even even a receptive organ. I mean, we in some senses hear through our larynx, because we are sympathetically vibrating with our environment through our organ of speech. It makes perfect sense. We would have an organ for understanding speech that also spoke in the beginning.
Okay, so Jeff, we're coming back to your favorite topic. Is an ought. John, I'll play the video and then I'll let you take it away.
And we and reality are more able to disclose who we are and what reality is. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about truth here, almost in the sense of betrothed, one of the original etymologies for truth, right? The idea that there are truths that are only accessible after we undergo significant transformation, right? And that's part of what's been driving our whole conversation here. The I don't know what to call it, the proposal, typified in Descartes, that no, all you need is a method, right? A method that will be universally applied, and that so transformation loses its ontological significance, right? It loses its the idea that there are aspects. I'll use the meta. I don't like inner and outer, but I'll use it right now, right? There are dimensions of the inner world and the outer world that are not disclosable unless those two have gone through transformation in some deeply coupled fashion. That's the driving engine in Plotinus's argument. It's like you can't, this deeper level of reality is inaccessible to you until you've gone through these transformations, and you can't do these transformations like independently from the way in which you're participating in reality. And for me, I mean, that was one of the reasons I wanted to engage in this project, because I mean, what we keep coming back to.
My God, I mean, if he just faced what he was saying, he's got it. He's really got it. These terms, we and reality, right? Well, do you know what that suggests? That we are in reciprocal relationship with reality, and reality is being, and we're in dialogue with beings other than ourselves that are other than human beings also. So reality is populated. So this changes the whole third person experience, because there's interiority to everything, not just us. I mean, Jesus, it's the kind of egocentrism that thinks that that we are the only things that have an interior life, or that we would be so egocentric as to deny an interior life is even ridiculous. Because it's so disrespectful to everything else around you. Like, there's no thou in the person you're talking to. There's no thou in the plant. There's no soul in the world. The soul phenomena are the more real experience that he was talking about previously, that people experience, but they don't know what to do with it because they've got no individuation in relationship to it. And so they're like David, I'm sorry if you're watching, if you're okay. I hope you are. Which is I've dropped down into a reality that's more real than real, and I don't have a way to negotiate it. But everything that you're saying is bullshit, because it's metaphors and made up, and it's like no, it's not. Everything is real, and we are in constant dialogue with reality around us, whether we like it or not. So it's like what the closing a parting shot that Zak gives as relates to what transformation is real. You don't have a choice. You're transforming. Are you going to be part of the realization in both senses of that word, that you're realizing something, but also you're realizing something? And then the idea that he also brings in is the Goethean idea, which is that we have to transform ourselves as instruments to be in mutually, I would say respectful, even mutual dialogue with the mystery and realities of existence that are speaking back to us. They're actually speaking back to us, because thinking is the universal activity that's interior to everything around us. And he's got it, right? He's got it all coupled right in there, because is and ought are not separate right there. You discover reality, you discover morality. You discover morality, you discover reality.
Because it's in the thou. It's in the thou-ness. I think Vervaeke would love that. We should clip that and send that to him on a little DVD player. I think he would really enjoy it.
Transformation loses its ontological significance. It's one of the growing up in a Western world, in a Western education system. There's only one reality, isn't there? But that's quite clearly what John is pointing to here, and they've said it multiple times in this video, is no. Reality, what you see as a reality, is a reflection of your own being. And in Steiner terms, so what we do is we recognize, so like the conceptual clarity that we gain about it, that we create in ourselves, we then find it reflected in outer life. It's not an outer world that's imposing itself on us. The truth isn't out there. The truth is created in here, and then I recognize it in the outer world. And if I don't bother working on enriching my conceptual life, my ways of understanding the world, then it doesn't. I will never see those realities, despite the fact that they are realities. That's what these guys are saying, and it's so it really it enters into this really what must be confusing to people, this perspective that reality depends on what you think it is, and that's a horribly must be a frightening perspective to all of those people that believe in some type of objective material science, because it's antithetical to the way that they see the world. And then they've got a lot of evidence to, so let's say there is a non-object, there is an objective view. It's like on the dead material world. But what they then do is then they're going to transpose that onto sort of like using those processes to understand life and soul phenomena and it's like the humane realm, and then so like and then into the super physical realms. So it opens up like a huge can of worms to anybody that listens seriously to what are essential truths that the three of them are saying here. Where is ontology? What is your theory of being? That theory of being only reflects, it's like where you are in your own conceptual development.
But there's also room for symbolic level, I suppose, if you have trust and faith in something that you don't personally have cognitive experience of yet. You kind of that it's my own experience is that my view of reality is not only contingent on my cognitive development, because I have trust in concepts that I haven't had experience of, because I see them mirrored in kind of lower resolution in my life, versions of that,
Yeah, or even lower dimensions, like
lower
more
dimensions.
easy to see, right? It's consilient. This is the power of Steiner's work too, for me.
And that in itself is so. It is a radical thing, because I wouldn't even say that the Western world has a view of the way the world works. I would say the Western world has unhealthy faith in Kant and believes that there is no possibility of knowing the way the world works. But there are tools that we can learn that seem to be quite reliable, so we can make science out of that. You to ask anyone why we do anything or what's the point of it in the West, they'll go, "Oh, we don't really know."
I think what you said there at the beginning is really important to what you're saying now, and it was sort of referred to by Zak in a kind of maybe negative light, which is that somebody is giving us information that we have to project mentally. When he was saying, you think you understand Aurobindo, but you don't, because you're not part of the ecology of practice with your peers. But what you're saying is really, really important. I think that we need to come back to for an offer to people. Particularly young folks, I think, who are mangled by this mechanistic training, is that it is okay to project the possibility of something existing that somebody tells you that you can't experience yourself. it's okay. You can hold the plausibility factor in mind, because if you don't traffic in concepts that transcend your own understanding, you'll never transcend your own understanding.
Exactly.
Right. So
Yes,
this
it's
is the
true.
thing, that's the gift that Steiner gives us. It's not like a following a guru around, speaking out of some hallucinatory state who's, got us drinking the tea. It's a teacherly authority, right? And he has an epistemological asymmetry on us, and we have to recognize where that's the case. And with other human beings, like I don't go to my mechanic and say, you're an idiot. How could you know this? I don't perceive that. That's not true, that the combustion engine works that way. That's a religious nonsense. Nobody says that as relates to experts in a field. So, but yes. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Well said.
Yeah. Also, I want to drag religion out to beat the hell out of it a little bit here, because we have been going pretty hard at Descartes and Newton and the mechanistic and the Enlightenment and the empiricism, the one-sided coarse empiricism that ignores the moral impulse. But formal religion is to blame on this issue, because science is nested in the West, is nested in a exoteric Christianity that eliminated participatory experience through amputating that which is spiritual, that is incarnating in the soul and the body. And so, in Council of Nicaea, no, you don't have access to the Holy Spirit. We're going to have to go to the priest and do all sorts of self-flagellation and incantations, and you're going to have to. Right. So the church can provide this for you. Now, Kate, I don't mean to, I think you know what I'm saying. I believe in the religious impulse. It's just that it was exotericized so that it became science later, which is a kind of religion yeah.
And actually, the final video we're going to look at, I think, also talks to your point, Kate, there, that it isn't just about the conceptual. I think those are the words you use, that like outer life has a hugely important role in this developing our own understanding of what it is. It's the final clip. So let's
while you're cueing that, I wanted to also give a shout out to John there, and when he used the term betrothed, linking it to the word truth. God, that's beautiful. The alchemical wedding is that it's a spiritual marriage, right? And the truth has to do with being
wedding yourself to it,
entwined with reality. Yes, and entwinement also is related to symbol, by the way, etymologically speaking, right? It's within the throes of, which is related to symbolos, which is the ball, but it's not a noun; it's a verb. You don't play ball by yourself. Say.
Okay, here goes Zach.
The way that notion transformed with the onset of modernity, that there wasn't an absence of the notion. It just kind of went underground, because you still have in science, like especially nowadays, this notion of an expert, right? Which is someone who, by that definition, kind of knows something you don't know by virtue of like putting in 10,000 hours or whatever the technical definition is. So this notion of epistemic asymmetry as related to teacherly authority is one of the things I worry about a lot. And so it's a very interesting problem, and the root of transformation. And so, like, there's several things to say here. One is that there's a difficulty in it, because because you can as we've talked about, you can move through transformative processes that do disclose realities, but narrow, limited bandwidth realities. So it's kind of like saying, listen, you're going to transform, you're going to develop, that's going to disclose more reality. So pay attention to how you're transforming and developing, because that will literally become what you are and know and feel with your being. And so this is the deep philosophy of education question. Learning is inevitable. If you spend all day playing video games, you will learn to become extremely good at video games, right? Like, don't pretend that's not going to happen. And similarly, if you just learn what they tell you in school, then you'll just be really good at what they tell you in school. So there's
Jeff, do you want to go on that one?
I just sums it up beautifully, right? It just that transformation is inevitable. That we don't even have a model for transformation in our conventional mindset. That is the modernity that's running out of gas right in front of us, but not in a self-destructive way. To me, it's like an opening. It's like with what he just said was, here is the possibility to enter into the realities of transformation. Every individual can do it, and it's happening whether you know it or not. So you're going to take hold of it, or are you just going to be run over by the transformation bus? And the idea that in the previous clip that John brought, which is the problem of the killing of the ontology of transformation. Like you can't kill it. It just goes underground and morphs out as exteriorized interior life, right? And so this is Marshall McLuhan's description of what Matt pointed out to me recently in a side conversation, is that McLuhan really saw the need for the Christic impulse and that if we didn't engage in the Christic impulse, that we would create a worldwide web that was a technological substitute or amputation. This was McLuhan's language, that we will produce something transformative. Not only will we transform ourselves, but we'll produce something transformative. Witness the economy and technology. We will produce those things, but if we're not aware of it being an internal process, then the external process will substitute the development of the internal process as a capacity, which needs to be a collective consciousness, which is accessible to everyone. And I'll tell just a brief story, if you don't mind. Orland Bishop tells this story, and he's in a community of people who have invited him. Michael Lerner, who's a pretty well-known guy in the New Age movement over time. He had a magazine called Tikkun, and I think that's how it's pronounced. In any case, at the end of a talk, Michael was like, "How can we have you here with us more often, and so that you can keep giving us this wisdom that you're giving us? It's like it's so dense, and it seems to almost like go away when you're gone." And he was like, he told a story. He said that he was he went to a village with a group of people, and it was maybe it was his home village. I'm not gonna accurately recount the story, but I'll get to the spirit of it. And he goes to the village, and there it's African, his home African village, say, and they have no water, and they're having to just do these. You've heard the stories of people having to travel great distances to bring water back, and in these drought-stricken places. And so he says, well, we need to go to the elders. So the elder will tell us where the water is, but they don't know how to bring it out of the ground. So he goes to the elder, finds out where the water is, and then with modern resources comes to the spot, pulls the water out of the ground, and water flows there today in a way it's never flowed, with a richness, a minerality, and a living quality of available health-giving benefits that was always there but couldn't be tapped into.
Mhm.
Could I say the final words there and link it into the Christ impulse that's behind this whole endeavor? John 4:13. This is where he's talking to the Samaritan woman. I'll read 11. Sir, the woman said, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it, as did also his sons and livestock? Jesus answered, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life. The woman said to him, Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water.